Hello, beautiful, and welcome to the podcast where we're moving the conversation forward about the choices you make in your daily life. I'm your host, Monica Cox, and I'm here right alongside of you, learning, growing, observing, and trying to make better choices consciously and subconsciously. Together, we're going to become better versions of ourselves and have raw, honest, open conversations about the things that truly affect our lives. And maybe, just maybe, finally get to a place where everyone else's BS doesn't trigger us.
See, hear, feel that trauma, but I also don't understand why in 2023 the victimhood mentality has to still play a role and why people can't take responsibility for their own health and their own healing and say enough is enough of the bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, that just comes down to like what we wanted to talk about today, right? The discipline, the willpower, the accountability, the consistency. It's like, I don't think it's born into people per se. Or what do you think? Do you think that it's like a learned skill, a skill that's inside of you? And if you're willing to like remove the bullshit, you can use it? Because you see it on like all walks of life in all areas. Like you see the rich kids who like go and fuck up the shit, right? Like they literally have a life on a silver platter and they're like, rebel, like whatever trauma came with having, daddy money banks, right? And then you have it on the other side of people who are born into poverty and die millionaires. Like that's like my grandfather's story. He was like an orphan at one stage of his life and he died a millionaire. It's like, where is that in the field of like energetics?
Right. Yeah, I think epigenetics, which is simply the study of how our choices and behaviors influence our genetics, right? What genes get turned on and off. I think that has definitely plays a role. And I think if you're willing to look a little deeper than that to try to figure out like how choice works within a species that is not just biological but also spiritual, leads you to things like contracts and energetics from a very like um soul level place. Okay. I think it's a bit of both. I think it's both ancestral or need to be careful of how I use these terms because number one, it's important. I'm not just trying to like not get hate on the internet because I could give a shit, because I want to make sure that I'm being clear from both a nature and nurture perspective. We'll use those terms because people understand them best. Um, So nature being your genetics, right? The things that's biological. Nurture being in my field as an energetic worker, healer, um, is more of that. This is what you have chosen to step into. You chose your parents, you chose your birthday, you chose the life that you're deciding to be in. And with that choice comes certain lessons that you decided that you needed to learn, and some of that could be poverty, some of that could be intergenerational curses, from bloodlines long through you, right? So I think it's both. I think in my world, like if I exclude one, then I'm not getting the full picture. So I have to look at what are the societal things that have programmed in these trauma based responses, that's victimhood, whether you're rich or poor or somewhere in between. And what are the things that as a soul are choices that we decided that this was a lesson that I needed to learn and get over. And did I let life get in the way and not utilize everything I have inside of me, overcome it? And I think now we're seeing a very small, and I say small because I'm thinking about the billions of people on this planet, not just in one state or in one country, the billions of people on the planet. We're seeing a very small percentage of them say, I'm going to look at a much bigger picture than just this is what my genetics had planned out for me. Oh, I was born into a family where my dad was Black and my mom was white, and my dad's family history was slavery. And therefore, I'm born into a line of trauma, right? If I only looked at that and didn't look at I am my own human being. I am my own soul. I'm my own spirit that can make choices. And I do not have to be subject to the line of my history, right? If I only looked at that, then I would still be in that victimhood mentality. And I think that that's what we're seeing in some of these minority, even though in some places it's the majority, um, societies, cultures, spaces, is that they're only looking at that one line. They're only looking at, well, if this was what I was born into, then of course I'm supposed to be traumatized. Of course I'm supposed to be the minority. Of course I'm not supposed to stand up. Of course I'm not supposed to speak up. Of course I'm not supposed to own my own power. Of course I'm not supposed to become sovereign. But if you look at that other line, the choice line, right? The I stepped into this on purpose. Then you start to realize that you can become all of those things that other line tells you that you shouldn't become.
Yeah. I totally resonate with choices. And I think people though have a really hard time believing, or even kind of like in their head, like, what the fuck you mean I chose this? Right.
Yes, they
And
do.
especially
100%.
when you in this lifetime have had a physically, mentally, emotional hard time, right? um I always kind of think of like, okay, if we chose everything, there's
Mhm.
still a big part of our lives that are free will, and that every human being around us are choosing at every moment what their next step is in free will, right? So when people are like, well, I like that kid didn't choose to come down to be like sexually assaulted, her whole entire life, right? And it's like, well, what about the choices that everyone around her is also making during this time to create that reality? And you're just like, you're grinning. So like, I'm interested in like, like I'm still dissecting all this stuff for myself, right? And this is why I wanted to start this podcast, is to help like myself and help everyone else who are kind of like coming to different realities or different parts of their timeline, and just like their head is exploding, because the reality is like we have so much information now, right? And we are like bombarded with like everyone's different opinions, and obviously you have to discern like what feels right for you.
Mhm.
But going back to your big grin, like what
Yeah.
like what do you have to say about that?
I love it. I love that because that is the thing that that um that idea that you were mentioning of, well, if we chose it, how could we possibly have chosen for ourselves to suffer? And I love it because it's the biggest thing that like atheists will use to, talk about how there's no God or no creator, because how could something that is quote unquote all powerful allow for pain to happen? And I love it because this is where the conversation gets good, because you have to be able to stretch your understanding of what it means to be a soul. And that can be something that is incredibly difficult for people. So I will say that you can choose something, understanding that it is the best thing for you because you know how you fucked up before. So a couple of different things have to be held in one's head when we examine this. One, that this is not our only life, that we have lived other lives before, okay, and or are currently living other lives. Like if you believe that there is an multidimensionality and different versions of yourself that are making different choices at the same time that you're living on this one, right? And that you have a soul, a record that is taking stock of all of these choices that you are making, and that you have all the time, every life, every option, right, to utilize your free will to make those choices, right? One doesn't exclude the other. Me saying that you chose to come into this life knowing exactly what happens to you doesn't um negate the fact that you have free will, right? But most people think that it does. Most people think, well, if I chose this, then that means everything is predestined, therefore I don't have free will. But that's not the way it is. You have to be able to hold two truths simultaneously. Most people can't.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a sad thing in my mind. But then again, I also know that that's part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so at this point, I then say, if you can suspend your mind for more than 3 seconds and hold that there was a time when you remembered every life you ever lived, understanding where your consciousness needs to go, which, if you're talking to most intuitives, most energy workers, the end goal is unity back with source.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That there is a moment when we're not living a life, when we're up in whatever you want, whatever etheric limbo middle space that we can exist in for a little while before we decide to come back into another life. That when we're up there, we remember everything that we have ever learned, been party to, the choices that we've made in other lives. And we say, I want to reach a full unity with source. What does that look like? Okay. How do I get there? Okay. Well, I ended up making poor choices in these other lives. So how do I make it so that I can, one, like kind of atone for those things? Or how can I make it so I don't end up messing up again? Oh, wait, here is a disease that will force me. But if I get this disease, if I contract into cancer or lupus or whatever, if I contract into this, if I make sure that I go into that, because that is going to be the easiest way for me to learn it, because I know me, I know my soul, I know all these other lives that I've lived and all these other choices that I made where I didn't have this bad thing happen to me, but I still didn't learn it. I still didn't learn the lesson. So my soul hasn't been able to advance. It's been able to advance, but not to where I really wanted to go. Is it not? Is it then easier to understand how, one, you chose it, going, okay, I know that if I can go in here, if I can have this happen to me, it's a choice that that soul is making. But then having the beauty of, once you're in that life, having everything be free will, your ability to choose moment by moment, where you have time from the time that you're a baby to the time that you die to actually have a remembering of, you know what, I want to make it to source. I want to find unity consciousness. Do I really need to suffer in order to learn the lesson that I need to learn? Because when we come down here, do we remember all of those lessons? No, we don't. And that's just one of the, like, in my opinion, is one of like the bullshit rules of this
I agree with that.
plane of existence, this whole human amnesia thing that we got going on, which is, it's lessening as our consciousness keeps going. It's lessening, but it's still there. But that's where that free will comes in. We can choose every single time. Like, do we need to have this suffering in order to get to us to this place where we need to be? So that's where my big grin comes in,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
this is the conversation that people struggle with every single day.
Yeah. And like what my mind's thinking now is that and we've talked about this before, how I truly believe that we have really dumbed down our genes, right, through the generations and through poor choices as a collective, right, in all the realms. And this is affecting our children. And I mean, no one can argue this, right? Like the statistics are there. I don't care what side of the fence you on, what your belief system is, like you are not, you have to have your head in the sand if you don't see what's happening.
Talk to any
And
teacher and they're going to tell you, well, 10 years ago we made you read 20 pages, now we're making you read 5.
yeah, yeah, they have lowered the standards dramatically. And I know in my personal journey, like when you were talking about this, of like, okay, you have to learn all these lessons of like getting back to source. And it's really like slowing down, right? Like slowing down is, and being conscious and being present is the way you're going to get there. So you, like for me, I had all the lessons, like whatever lesson, like for some reason I got them all. Like I've got I got the t-shirts, right? And is it, when you are able to do that, you are, and I feel like a lot of my clients that come to me, I'm able to say to them, like, look, you have to do the hard work so your children don't have to. Like we're kind of like on this pendulum swing of like, okay, we've been going down, 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 and down for so long. There has to be enough of us who are like, okay, it's time to go up. And like we might have to live a certain way on this physical plane to keep whatever in check until, whatever. I'm slowly getting there, that you can radically like not be intolerant to tomatoes anymore just because you fucking believe that you're not intolerant to tomatoes anymore. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there. But then your children don't have to worry about those food allergies, right? The simple things in life. And they are able to then they take their lives and move forward, getting to that source.
Yes. And I think that this is where, especially for parents, it I really, really stress for them. You have to be able to hold two truths at once. One, that whatever choices you make for your biological line, your physical line, continue on through as you, in a physical body, decide to procreate. Okay. And that's why it's so important to make good, healthy, positive choices that are going to have lasting effects in your genetics. But you also have to hold the idea that your child, while biologically is a part of you, is its own soul
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't give two shits about the fact that you made choices to help promote that physical line forward. Because if they really truly need to have a food allergy, I'll tell you that if that soul was like, oh, I was going to make a contract for you to be my mom, but you've now eradicated this like inability to process tomatoes out of your line, but I need that in order to be able to like learn the lesson I'm supposed to learn. I'm not going to choose you as my parent.
Yeah. But I mean,
Right.
don't you think that evolution of souls, like you said, like, don't we want to get to a part where like we've all learned the fucking lessons and no one needs to go to Earth to learn these like bullshit lessons? Like that's in my head of like,
I would say that if you're choosing a life on earth, then you are choosing to understand what it is to understand polarity, duality, um, and how one's choices affect everything that happens to us. If you're like kind of done with all of that, then you're not going to choose a life here on Earth. There's billions and billions of stars with habitable planets. I don't care what people say. You don't have a universe that only has one place for life.
yeah,
Like, if you're a scientist, you understand that's true, whether or not the government tells you that there are aliens or not. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and so with that being the case, you choose as a soul to go someplace else where consciousness exists.
All right. So is Earth like the fucked up place to come then? Like it just like racks my brain. All right, guys, we are going to pretend like it's 1992 and we are going to pause this episode. It's to be continued. This is called anticipation. If you have not felt this in a really long time, you're welcome. I think it's a feeling that we all need to bring back into our lives. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And thank you once again for tuning in and looking forward to continuing this conversation on the next episode. Thank you so much again for joining us here on Choices. You can go ahead and leave a 5-star review because we're all friends here. But if you really want to move the conversation forward, please connect with us on our social media accounts, which you can find the links below. Have a beautiful week, and we'll see you next time here on Choices.